Ever struggle with comparing revenue for outlets open at different times in Power BI? Aligning those start dates can be a real puzzle, right? In this video, I'll show you a practical solution using Power BI's core visuals and some cool tricks to achieve it. Plus, I'll show you how you can compare a specific outlet's revenue trend to the average for any selected number of days. Stick around till the end. There are many tips and tricks in this video. This real-life example can be applied to many similar scenarios and use cases. Let's get started. Subscribe to this channel and stay up to date with my latest content. If you would like to follow along with me, download the PBIX file from the link in the description below. Alright, we have a simple star schema model here, a dates table, a table for the outlets, and a fact table for daily revenue, all connected using one-to-many relationships. Outlet table has the outlets with their launch dates in different time periods and the regions. A standard date table, it's a key element in many Power BI projects. Daily revenue table is straightforward, having just daily revenue by date and outlets. To kick things off, we'll start with a native line chart. If you want to compare the outlets side by side based on their revenue since they opened, let me show you the challenge in visualizing it using dates. Let's add the dates on the x-axis and the total revenue measure, which is a simple sum of the revenue column, onto the y-axis. I will add the outlets onto the legend to split the revenue by outlets. You can hardly see anything on the chart. It's crowded so much. A better way to analyze this is to use a cumulative revenue measure. So let's create a new measure to calculate the cumulative revenue instead of showing the daily revenue, which should give us a clear view of the outlet-wise revenue over time. Let me start with a new measure. I'll call it cumulative revenue. Calculate. I'll use total revenue measure and apply a filter on dates column to be less than or equal to the max date. Fine. Let me confirm it. Let me replace the total revenue with the cumulative measure. Now it's showing how the revenue of each outlet grew since the launch date. I will filter to a single region so we can see clearly. This looks fine, but our aim and the challenge here is to align outlets to a single point to start from day one or the launch date for us to compare the outlets side by side as you see in this chart. To accomplish this, I need to add the number of days instead of the dates column here. Each outlet will start with day 1 and so on. For this technique, I was inspired by one of the videos posted by Avi Singh over at Power BI Pro. I have given the link in the description, you can refer to it. Let's switch to the daily revenue table and add a new calculated column to calculate the number of days since launch for each outlet. Add a new column. Let's name it days since launch. Here I can get the launch date for each outlet using the related function, as we have an active relationship between the outlet and the daily revenue table. Now I will minus the launch date from the transaction date to get the number of days for each line. I'll use int function to make it an integer. We have the days coming, but I need it to start from day 1 and so on. So let's add +1 at the end. I can check if all outlets start with day 1 by applying a filter on the column to day 1. We see it works. Let's move on. Since we are going to add some measures and then slice and dice based on this field, it's always better to create a dimension table for this field. I will create a new table and call it operation days. This table is supposed to have the list of days from 1 to the maximum days available in the calculated column that we just created. I will use a table function here called generate series and start with 1, and then the end value is coming from the daily revenue table from the days since launch. I'll get the maximum of it. I will also rename the column header here to days since launch. You can assign any name here. Next, we will establish a relationship from the newly created table to the daily revenue table on days since launch. It's a one-to-many relationship. We also need to create a measure to calculate the cumulative revenue based on the new column we just added. Let's add a new measure and name it cumulative revenue. I will keep it short. We are calculating the total revenue by applying a filter on the days since launch column to be less than or equal to the current value in the filter context. Now I will add the days since launch column onto the x-axis and the cumulative revenue measure we just created to the y-axis. Now all the outlets start with 0, making it easy for us to compare them side by side. Currently, the x-axis shows all available days. That's why you see some outlets start to become flat. Fine. I will add a slicer to allow the user to select the number of days to show on the x-axis. Let me drag and drop the days since launch on the canvas. Change it to a slicer visual, resize it, turn off responsive status under properties and give it a title. I can call it days since launch. This allows the user to select the number of days since launch and compare the outlets. Let me make it 30 days. This chart basically gives you an indication of how each outlet is building up on revenue from day of launch up to the 30th day. But there are some drawbacks to this chart. Suppose if I need to change the colors of all these outlets to gray and highlight a single selected outlet, maybe using a disconnected table with a different color, it becomes so complicated. Alternatively, you can also highlight it using the legend. But when there are many outlets, this chart becomes too cluttered. We need to have a better way to compare and analyze the outlet revenue. Now let's move on to the next phase of this chart, where we will compare the selected outlet revenue to the average outlet revenue and highlight the deviations while showing the minimum and the maximum revenue band as shown in this completed version. First, I need to create a measure to calculate the average outlet revenue. Add a new measure, name it average outlet revenue. I will use average x function on all selected outlets and calculate using the cumulative revenue measure. Fine, I'll confirm it. I will remove the outlets from the legend and add the average revenue measure here. Let's apply some formatting to it. Under lines, line style dash, stroke with 1, line color to gray. Next, let me add the band that shows the minimum and the maximum revenue using the error bars. For this, I need to add two more measures. The first measure is to get the minimum outlet revenue. I'll start minimum outlet revenue, min-x on all selected outlet IDs. I'll use cumulative revenue and calculate the min-x. And I will copy this measure and create the next measure. Rename it to max outlet revenue. Modify the min to max and max x and confirm it. Now in the format pane, under error bars, make sure you have the average outlet revenue selected. Enable it, add maximum outlet revenue to the upper bound and the minimum outlet revenue to the lower bound. Keep the relationship to the measure as absolute. Now we will turn off the bar, turn on the error band as we need to show it as a band. Set the transparency to 90% and make sure the marker shape is to none. We can now see the average outlet revenue and the minimum and the maximum bands. If I change the regions, it's dynamic. Great. It's better to turn on the series label to show what each line means here. We will also add the minimum and the maximum revenue measures to the chart so it shows what the band represents. Okay. We don't need the lines for these two measures, so I can go and make the stroke width to 0. Now we need to provide a way for the user to select an outlet and compare it with the average outlet revenue to see how it has performed compared to the average in the selected days of operation. I need to add a table visual here onto the canvas. I need to have a copy of the outlet dimension table as I don't want the selection to filter the chart that we already have. Let's switch to the model view and add a new table. Let me name it outlet selection and assign the existing outlet table. I will also create a relationship to the daily revenue table and make it inactive to avoid conflict with the existing relationship and only use it in the measures that we need. Great. Let me sort the outlet by outlet ID. Now I will add the outlet from this new table to the visual, and we also need to create a measure to show the variance between the outlet revenue and the average. For this purpose, add a new measure. I'll name it selected outlet revenue. This calculates the revenue for the selected outlets. Let's start with a variable called the selected outlet revenue. Since we need the revenue based on the outlet coming from selection table, which doesn't have any active relationship, let me calculate the revenue using the use relationship to leverage the inactive relationship. I will create another variable called result and ensure that only one outlet is selected and return the value, otherwise blank. Fine. I need one more measure to calculate the variance by deducting the average revenue from the selected outlet revenue. I'll add a new measure and name it average versus selected outlet. Let me assign the selected outlet revenue to a variable. I will also apply a condition to control the calculation by checking if the revenue calculated has some value. Fine. Let me add the measure and rename it on the visual as a revenue versus average. Let me apply some formatting to the number to thousands, remove total, and align the header to right. Great. To make the variances more prominent, I will add a conditional formatting using the data bars. Let's also format green and red for positive and negative variances. Now, this shows the positive and negative variances clearly for each outlet. Next step, we need to show the revenue trend of the selected outlet on the chart. When I click on it, it doesn't show anything. So I'll add the selected outlet revenue measure to the visual. Change the line to solid and color to black. Now when I select an outlet, it shows the revenue trend and you can see how it has performed against the average. At this point, we can make some enhancements by applying red when the selected outlet revenue is below the average and green when it is above. Again, we need two more measures, one for the positive and one for the negative variances. Let me name the measure as above average for positive variance, and I'll start with a variable and name it as average revenue and assign the average versus selected outlet revenue measure to it, then add -1 to turn it to opposite sign for the error bar. Create another variable, I'll call it result. Here I only need to pick the variance 0 or below. So let's use min function, start with average revenue or the 0. So whichever is lower it will pick, so below 0. and I'll return results. Fine. I copy this measure and confirm it. Let's add the second measure for the negative variance. Paste the code here and name it as below average and change min to max and confirm it. Here I don't need values below 0, so I used max. Next, we'll set up the error bars to show the variances for positive and negative variances. Under error bars, select the selected outlet revenue, enable it, add the above average to the upper bound, and make the relationship to the measure as relative. Turn off the bar and turn on the error band color to green, change the transparency to 30. If you notice, Power BI doesn't allow you to apply different formatting for upper and lower bounds here. It has a single setting. We need to do a workaround. Let me create a copy of the selected outlet revenue and name it as selected outlet revenue 2. Then assign the same measure value here. I will add it to the visual and change the line color to black. Next, we will work on the error bar. Under error bars, select the selected outlet revenue 2 measure, enable it. For the lower bound, choose below average and set the relationship to the measure as relative. Turn off the bar and turn on the error band color to red, change the transparency to 30. From the left table visual, I can easily identify the outlets with their revenue variances against the average and click on it and study the trend. This gives a solid insight into the revenue performance since launch date. One last thing that is remaining is the subtitle. I need to add a dynamic subtitle as I did in my completed version. When no outlet is selected, the subtitle says please select an outlet below to compare with the average. Once you select one, you need to analyze. The subtitle changes dynamically to reflect the performance stats. Let's build a measure and assign it to the subtitle. I'm going to call this measure as subtitle. I'm going to create a couple of variables. The first one is the selected outlet. The second one, maximum days from the days since launch, whatever number of days selected in the slicer. Then next I need the selected outlet revenue. Fourth one is the comparison. Basically I already have created average versus selected outlet revenue. I'm going to format it so that the positive value will have a up arrow with number formatting to 1000. I'll include K here to indicate it's in 1000, and I also want to show it's above. Semicolon for the negative value. I put an emoji here for the down arrow, and number format K. Let's type below. Done. Next, the title text. Here I'm going to construct my title text starting with the outlet name and colon, and I'm going to use format to get the outlet revenue with 1000 K and revenue in, and show the maximum number of days selected here, and it's in days. Then and I need to show the comparison amount, and I need to also show that this is the average outlet revenue. Fine. The last one is the result equal to if I will check if an outlet is selected, right? Then it becomes true. Then I show the title text. Otherwise, if nothing is selected, select an outlet from the visual below to compare against the average. I'll close it and return the result. Before we assign the subtitle, let me go and add a title to our chart. Let's call this outlet revenue comparison analysis. For the subtitle, I'm going to turn it on and assign the measure that we just created, which is subtitle. Click OK. Now you get the subtitle here. Now when I click on any outlet, it shows the revenue and its key stats dynamically. With this, I have come to the end. Share your thoughts on this video by leaving your comments and questions below. If you appreciate content on this channel, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more interesting videos. Many thanks and have a nice day. Thank you.